Welcome back to InfoWars Nightly News. And on the subject of that InfoWars Reporter Contest, which you just saw an ad for, there's a new update article regarding that. Also more information about the submissions process. So I really encourage you to get involved with that. And who knows, you could be appearing on this very show in the not too distant future. Now, I'm delighted to welcome a regular and much valued contributor to Infowars.com and an expert really in the field of Agenda 21 and the neo-eugenics population control movement. And that is Jurriaan Maessen. Jurriaan, welcome to Infowars Nightly News.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Now, first off, for people who don't know, just tell the viewers about yourself and how you got into writing about these subjects.
Well, I actually started out by writing a book with a friend of mine. It's called The Secret of Zionsburg. And, well, it's actually about the royal family of Holland, the Oranges, Queen Beatrix being the current day exponent of the entire facade. And while doing research on that subject, I, of course, came to know the habits of eugenics by the elite, and that's the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha families, which are spread throughout Europe. Also the UK, of course, changing their name to Windsor. And in Holland, that's also by Prince Bernhard, important influence in regards to the whole eugenics agenda that's being pushed by the elite of the royalty of Europe. So that's how I rolled in this information and learned much more about it along the way.
Now, your latest article, which is on Infowars.com today, which I read earlier, UN-backed scientists call for megacity population lockup. And this is similar to the Plandopolis agenda that we've covered in the past, about herding us into these ghetto cities in the name of, protecting the earth from humanity itself. And you've got in there one of the quotes from the scientists who was behind this project that you'll talk about. Quote, "We certainly don't want them strolling about the entire countryside. We want them to save land for nature by living closely together." And again, just total sneering, elitist arrogance, class warfare rhetoric. Jurriaan, tell people about this Planet Under Pressure organization that you write about in this article and what they're calling for.
Well, what they're calling for now is obviously a result of a very old agenda, and that agenda has been formulated by the term Agenda 21, which actually means population reduction. I mean, that's the basic thing about it. It's called sustainability. It's called saving the earth, exactly what you said. Under those names, under those guises, a population reduction agenda is being executed. And it's being executed quite effectively so far. But megacities, like herding the people, closing them in, enclosing them within the confines of a megacity, of course being a prison planet in its own right, every city, a grid, you could say, keeping those people in. And the elite can then roam free around the countryside, which they don't want us strolling through. And the basic agenda is eugenics. It has been for a long time. Aaron Dykes did a lot of important research on that subject, and everybody should check his work out also. He made a couple of very important YouTube films about that.
And in this article, these scientists behind this group talk about humanity creating this Anthropocene environment through man-made climate change. Even as all their global warming models are proven completely fraudulent about, CO2. Of course, we know, as you said, the Earth is much cooler now than it has been eons in the past before carbon dioxide emissions from human activity. And they accused us of interspecies genocide when they're the ones advocating genocide themselves. I mean, just go through the quotes that you've got in that article. I think there's one towards the end of the article where they talk about directly reducing human population.
Right. I think that was the article about the Colorado professor actually quoting the whole anthropogene concept, throwing it out there, and adding to that people have little time left to cool the planet, and otherwise we should just get rid of those people. That's what the elite states. And what this professor actually states is we have to reduce current human numbers. So that he doesn't just say we have to reduce numbers per se, perhaps over the long run, like a mild eugenicist might suggest. He says just reduce them right now. So that means killing people outright. And that's just one of the quotes he made. He wrote down in that particular essay he wrote. It's called Environment and Ethics or something. Ethics is a term that keeps popping up. And these are very dangerous people. These are people that have to be stopped in their tracks, because otherwise we have a very big problem on our hands.
And that was... the article was called Professor Prevent Interspecies Genocide, Reduce Current Human Numbers. And that's Philip Cafaro. And in that, which I read earlier, of course, he advocates China's one-child policy directly. He states, quote, China's policies have largely stabilized its population. Well, yes, they have, if you consider wild imbalances in males to females to be a stable situation. And, 500 female suicides a day in China, many of which are directly attributable to the one-child policy. So, I mean, Jurriaan, this one-child policy in China was brought about as a result of the error-prone policies of Chairman Mao. He wanted the population he wanted warrior mothers to have 10 kids so they could go join the communist army. That's what caused China's booming population problem. Now they've got something even worse, which is forced sterilization, forced abortion. Why do the elite see China as a model for the West?
Because it's a collectivistic society. So I think the elite considers the West as it is now and as it has been much too individualistic. So they want a more collectivistic. They want a state that actually micromanages the lives of all the people that are there. So the collectivistic model, I think, is especially suitable for the plans of the elite, because of I mean, the Chinese have been used to like propaganda since the communists came into power, since Mao came into power. Same goes for Soviet Union, of course, and that's now changed a little bit. But I think that's the prime driver, because they want to use China as the new engine for the world, the new economic front runner, and we all have to follow in its wake.
Now I want to get on to Rockefeller, because a big article that you wrote that got a lot of attention earlier this month was the Rockefeller Foundation actively engaged in mass mind control. Tell us about these documents and how they illustrate Rockefeller's involvement in mass brainwashing.
Yeah, they've been the Rockefeller Foundation funded it as far back even as the 20s. I don't even go into that in that particular article, but from the 20s on, they funded psychological research into behavior modification. That's how they call it. So that's social and psychological engineering. And how the science of that should be developed, and it should not be developed for the science itself, but it should be developed, of course, for their purposes, because they've used the results of that research, and we don't talk about years, we don't talk about decades, we're talking about centuries here, that they've refined this technique and put it out to the people. Predictive programming is a very important part of that, which Alan Watt covers in quite some detail. Predictive programming has been found to be so effective that it has been research into that has continued, especially by that professor called Hovland, which I write about in that article, which even who even did more research on that particular subject, predictive programming, and went ahead with that.
And in these documents, I was also reading, they actually brag about how they basically recruit media figures and journalists to push their agenda. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's it. Media figures, important ones, they have to be recruited to bind a large part of the mindless readers, mindless watchers of television programs to their causes. I mean, Angelina Jolie is a good example of how the UN recruits one, and she probably knows all about it. She's intelligent enough, I think, to actually know the agenda behind it. But celebrities are being used. UNESCO said in the 50s, we have to use more celebrities, more people to reform the educational process, because that's where young people turn to for their amusement and their information. Finally.
Now, one question that springs to mind just off the cuff is, how do you find all these documents? I mean, are you just finding them on the internet, or they're leaks, or do you have to go to libraries? Where do you get the material for all these Rockefeller Foundation articles?
Well, the Rockefeller Foundation articles are just posted on their website. I mean, it's their yearly reports most of the time. And if you, you just have to learn how to use a search engine on the internet, and you'll find the most amazing information spread all throughout the internet. You have to use keywords which the elite tends to use, and usually that's euphemisms for their actual purpose. So you have to Google the euphemisms, and by doing that, you can find a lot of information. Of course, the library is very valuable also. So I do a lot of research in the library. I have to order books and all that just to get some information.
So basically, again, it's about them hiding it in plain sight and throwing it in our face. They advertise it all on their own websites, but they know that 99.9% of people just aren't going to go and look. Which brings me to another question, which is, how do we present the threat that this neo-eugenics agenda represents in, the modern climate? How do we reach across to people and emphasize the point that it's an imminent threat, and just not the rantings of eugenicists from 50 years ago as debunkers try to characterize it?
I think current events as they unfold are the perfect way to illustrate what these plans are. So I think you have to constantly contrast current information, current events, with the knowledge that has been around for like decades or even more. So you can easily couple that to those current events, because actually those current events are results of the plannings which have been done decades ago by the social engineers. So I think that contrast in articles, I think everybody should just do their own research and don't be too perfect about it. Just write and do the research, because we need so much more people getting involved in this if people care about it.
And of course, a major fact is that John P. Holdren, the White House science czar, who is now in control of that policy directive, specifically in relation to geoengineering, is now in a position of power, having written in his own textbook in 1977 about how we need forced sterilizations, mandatory abortions, imposed by a planetary regime. So I suppose the fact that the guy who advocated that is now in the White House is all you need to present people with the fact that this is a very real and imminent threat.
That's right. I absolutely agree with you. And it's also, of course, a fact that it's no coincidence that especially this president chooses John P. Holdren to be his chief science advisor. So it's part of the agenda, and Obama's part of it. And of course, Holdren is an old proponent of the entire idea.
Well, it's been fascinating, Jurriaan. Your articles are always keenly read, and we'll look forward to the next one on Infowars.com. Jurriaan Maessen, have you got your own website, just lastly, that you want to plug?
I don't have a website yet, but I'll make a weblog pretty soon, and I think that's good to do right now.
Well, we really appreciate your time and look forward to having you back on Infowars Nightly News. Jurriaan Maessen, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
That's going to wrap it up for this Thursday, March 29th edition of Infowars Nightly News. We'll see you on the next edition. Good night.